working as a forest school leader when I noticed a robin observing our children's snack time from the woodland understory. I began bringing seeds to our sessions, and at first I would drop them nearby. As the weeks passed, the robin began eating from my hand. After a month, he would fly high over the children's heads to alight perfectly on my palm. By December, he had begun eating out of the tiny hands of a 4-year-old girl, and she had learnt to be still. That tiny exchange of trust between the robin and our forest school community didn't come from nowhere. It was built gradually through connection and repetition. When we respect our woodlands as living ecosystems and places, the magic begins. Woodlands are places that hold us, slow us, and teach us to pay attention. And the trees are at the heart of that ecosystem. They are not just scenery, they're companions. Even seeing a tree from a hospital window has been shown to improve recovery rates in patients and reduce stress responses. 4 weeks ago, I was in the John Radcliffe Hospital, recovering from complications from endometriosis surgery. Amid all of the chaos on that ward, the trees, which I could see from one of its many faceless windows, became my anchor as I gazed across the city. Trees provide us with flood protection, carbon storage, and shade. But more than that, they have the power to heal. Environmental psychologists have found that humans form powerful connections with trees, and that these support a sense of memory, identity, and resilience. Trees are not just scenery. They're companions. And yet, we leave them vulnerable. Moments of woodland connection can happen in many ways. A single leaf caught in the sunlight, the feeling of gathering chestnuts in autumn, or the first snowdrops rising up in spring. And yes, a robin, landing perfectly on the hand of a child. A moment which shows us how easily connection can begin. But this isn't just about children or robins. It's about the woodlands themselves and the quiet invitations to connect they offer us every day. And that is where the problem begins. If you always see the same person at the tree, at the shop, or at the gym, you'll begin to form a connection. The same can be said for the trees which we see on our streets and in our woodlands. Repeated connection creates a sense of safety. We know this instinctively, and there's research to support it. Repeated contact with the same natural features increases a sense of emotional stability, belonging, and safety. And it also gives us a sense of inner strength. But many of us do not have access to woodlands at all. In England, less than 16% of the population live within a 5-minute walk of a woodland. Underneath this is a values equation. When we look at these places only in terms of their transactional, ecological, financial value, we overlook their true worth. And because many of us haven't had the chance to have connection with a woodland at all, we do not realize what is at stake. Since we're in Oxford, some of you may be familiar with the Iffley Road. Growing up, there was a beautiful giant beech tree by the co-op. I always felt as though it looked over me when I went to the shop. In my early 20s, I became involved in local nature protection activities. And it was there that I saw on a Facebook group that the tree had been cut down. I was devastated. For weeks, I would avoid the road, even though it was on one of my main routes to work. But what surprised me most was that I wasn't alone in my grief. Members of the community shared pictures and memories of the tree on Facebook, and there was an outpouring of anger towards the council who'd authorized that decision. It was framed as a matter of health and safety, but there wasn't really any evidence that the tree was diseased. People left poems and candles at the site of the stump, and perhaps whoever authorized this decision wasn't aware of the potential mental health impact across the community. Eventually, the tree was replaced with a sapling which struggled to thrive. Relationships cannot simply be replaced. My journey protecting ancient woodlands began as a teenager, volunteering on a natural history project at Whiteham Woods. As we walked beneath the trees, One of my teammates told me about dozens of ancient oak woods which were being felled for the government's disastrous high-speed rail scheme, HS2. I was angry. I heard about protesters who were erecting camps in the trees to try to protect them, often unsuccessfully. I thought, surely this kind of mass felling must be illegal. Ancient woodlands are irreplaceable. Once they're lost, they're gone forever. Ancient woodland is any woodland which has been in place since 1600 in England and Wales, or since 1750 in Scotland. And it must have had continuous cover during that time, meaning there hasn't been a time at which all the trees have been cut down. But it is so much more than that. It is a complex web of interwoven connections and dependencies. It can be thought of a bit like a brain. Different parts grow and change as they interact. And that is what makes it so irreplaceable. Once it's been lost, it's not possible to simply start again. That's not to say that new woodlands aren't valuable, but what has been built anew can never be the same. The memory and knowledge stored in an ancient woodland soil cannot simply be fast-tracked or easily replaced. Ancient woodland covers less than 2.5% of the UK today, and current protections are not enough to keep even that safe. It is still being impacted by large infrastructure projects from the government, like HS2, or the new plans for the Lower Thames crossing in Kent. But even though these woodlands are not protected by law, we know that there needs to be stronger legal protection than there is now. This will only happen when people care enough to demand it. Laws change when protection becomes part of our culture, not an afterthought. Through my career, I've found that young people interact powerfully with ancient woodlands. Whether they're 5 or 25, it opens something up in them. One learner I worked with, I'll call him Jim. Well, Jim was seen as a bit of a disruptor in the classroom. So when the lessons weren't meeting his needs, he'd run away, and other staff would have to chase him around the school to try to keep him safe. During our first forest school session, Jim also ran, and he climbed one of the trees on our site. Soon, other members of the group would want to climb it as well, and Jim became the leader in showing them the way. The tree became the group's fort, and Jim had become their captain. Ancient woodlands allow those of us who do not feel fully accepted elsewhere to be truly ourselves. And behaviors that we often label as difficult in children become leadership or creativity in this environment. Everybody can feel connected to an ancient woodland, but for young people, that spark often sits closer to the surface. For the rest of us, it can sometimes get lost beneath the pace of life and distraction and capitalism. On another visit, I took a group of police force workers around an ancient woodland, and I found that they were fearful of their new environment. This was my first time leading a group that felt less confident outdoors. I remember a sense of panic that potentially this wasn't really going to turn out very well. Halfway through our walk, I stopped, and I led the group in a mindfulness activity called Meet a Tree. Each worker chose one of the many ancient oaks to sit beneath and spend 5 minutes with. At the end of the activity, I was as surprised as the members of the group themselves at the change that had overcome them. Before we'd started, I'd overheard comments like, "I hope my shoes won't get too muddy, and this walk had better not be too long." But by the end, they were more like, "It's so peaceful here, and I love these big trees." The workers had met the woodland, and it had opened something up in them. For young people, that spark often sits closer to the surface. Even through my work with Ancient Woodlands UK, I've found that when young people get the opportunity to take action powered by that connection, they do not hesitate. They act clearly, quickly, and with conviction. And that is why our connection to trees is so important. It is not sentimental. It is the beginning of the protection that the trees and woodlands need. Emotional connection leads to cultural momentum. That momentum leads to public pressure, and that is what ultimately leads to political will. It begins with the connection, but it doesn't end there. For me, that connection began as a young child, climbing trees on playgrounds, feeling different, and trying to escape the noise. I bonded deeply with the trees that I spent time with and lived in fear that somebody would cut them down. After hearing the story of HS2 and how these trees were being destroyed while protesters were sitting in them, I felt heartbroken. I began organizing local nature protection protests in Oxford, but I often felt like it didn't lead to a tangible change for nature beyond community building, which is of course very important, but I was getting more and more burnt out. We need a bigger change. We need a national recognition that these places matter. Because communities across the UK are fighting to try to protect their own green spaces and woodlands, with legal and political odds stacked against them. But with laws, where better to start than with the ancient woodland, our most irreplaceable habitat? If we can get categorical legal protection for that, it will change the way that we look at trees and ecosystems in general. I believe that young people will be at the heart of that change. In 2023, I founded a national campaign called Ancient Woodlands UK, with funding from the competition run by the National Trust. This was the beginning of a journey of learning that continues to this day. I lead a team of young people aged 16 to 30, and we campaign for this change together with different NGO partners. It's important to remember that our relationship with the land is only one of many. In many indigenous cultures, trees are viewed as living beings and ecosystems to live alongside. We've been working with a group called Lawyers for Nature to look at the idea of a Rights of Ancient Woodlands Bill, which is founded in the global Rights of Nature movement, the idea that ecosystems should have legal rights parallel to human rights. As a campaigner, it's often important to balance dreaming big and staying grounded, believing in what's possible, but also working with very few resources. In 2024, I led my team to organize a stakeholder consultation in London, which was attended by many major NGOs. But although the staff from those organizations were paid to be there, myself and the members of my team took time out of our jobs in order to organize it. We gained widespread support, but resources didn't always follow. At Ancient Woodlands UK, we remain committed to legal protection for ancient woodlands, and I work with my team to offer that and volunteering opportunities for young people. It's amazing what we can do when we work together to take action. And that has been one of the most rewarding parts of this journey, not only to share my love for ancient woodlands, but to see other people grow in their confidence through them. Woodlands grow connection. And so I come back to the image of a robin, landing perfectly on the hand of a child. A moment of trust, a moment of relationship, a moment that was only possible because we were in a woodland that allowed it. Protection begins with connection. And when we protect these places, we protect ourselves and our futures. I'd like to end with an invitation. Notice, listen, and reconnect. Let a relationship with a tree begin and see what grows from there. And let that tiny act of attention ripple outwards into protection, belonging, and a world where a robin still lands on the hand of a child. Because protection doesn't begin with policy. It begins when you connect. Thank you.